Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. This is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Anthony J. LaRette Jr. had been on a 10-year-long path of violence, murder, and rape. Everyone knew Mickey, with her stellar grades and driving ambition, would eventually follow her older brother's path and become the only other family member to graduate from university. Though separated by 12 years, Mickey and Dennis had always felt a common bond. On July 25, 1980, at 11:10 a.m., LaRette parked his car in a corner grocery store lot in the small town of St. Charles, Missouri, and followed Mickey into her apartment. When the savagery was over, he thought he had left the girl dead on the kitchen floor, but despite a gash across her throat that nearly decapitated her and 2 deep knife wounds to her heart, she somehow ran naked across the street to a neighbor's house, where she died on their front porch. Her final, desperate attempt to live provided a key to capturing her killer. And for 9 years, LaRette sat uncooperative on death row in Potosi, Missouri, until he was introduced to a young deputy, Patricia Jewell. The book that we are going to be profiling this evening is The Girl That Had No Enemies and The Man Who Hated Women, with my special guest, journalist and author, Dennis Fleming. Welcome to the program, and thank you for agreeing to this interview, Dennis Fleming.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Well, thank you very much. Very interesting book, and a little different perspective, with this being a true crime memoir. Very, very interesting book. And so let's get right to this. Tell us why you came to this, and anybody who listened to the introduction might not know. What was the reason for this project? Why was this book project so important to you? Who is Mickey to you, and why did you want to write this book?
Well, I come from a rather large family, and Mickey was the youngest of 8 children. And my background, my family is one of, there was quite a bit of violence in my family due to my father's alcoholism and my parents continually fighting, and a lot of my siblings experimented with alcohol and drugs, and I seemed to be sort of an oddball in my family. I did some of that stuff too. I mean, we all do that when we're 17, 18 years old. But as I grew older, my youngest sister and I seemed to have a bond, that we were the ones that were going to go to college, and we felt like we were kind of in a strange family. She looked at me once and said, "Gee, do you feel like you're adopted?" And I, we had this bond. And
sure.
She was living at home with my mother, and my other younger sister was living there when Mickey was murdered by this serial killer from out of town, Anthony LaRette. And when LaRette killed her, it was as if he killed my whole family, because it took away the connection for me, for my family. And I waited years and years and years and years, and finally I wrote the memoir about her death, her loss to the family, and I published it in 2008. And after I published it, I'd been contacted by a number of people who were family members of some of LaRette's victims. And it got me thinking about the other murders that he had committed, and
Sure.
And how those came about, how he confessed to them. And so I started researching more into him as a killer. Who was he, and of these other people that he had murdered. And I rewrote the book and brought it out this year with a different title. And it deals with some of his psychological background, and also with the deputy who interviewed him over a 6-year period and got him to confess to these other 30 rapes and murders.
Right. You had one heck of a story as it was already, but I think adding this is just there's a couple other dimensions added to this. So let's get to that. Let's talk about your sister a little bit more. What she was, again, you felt like outsiders within your own family, and she was certainly a bright and ambitious young girl. But tell us a little bit more about her in terms of what she had been doing in the last couple of years previous to this eventful day.
Well, it sounds like a fairy tale story. Like I said, she's the youngest in this family that's pretty much of a dysfunctional family, but she was. High grades, A's and B's. She played on the basketball team. She played on the softball team. She's athletic and very fit, clean cut. Didn't smoke cigarettes. Didn't. Her last couple of years before she died, when she was 18 when she died, I think she had gone out with some girlfriends. And you know how you do in high school in your junior, senior year. You go to parties. And I'm not saying she was a saint, but she was, compared to most of the people around my family, she was sort of like a diamond in a coal pile. And the great irony of this is that my mother had just moved into a location. She had divorced my father. She had moved into a very nice neighborhood, and for once in her life, she felt free from my father, and the girls, Nikki and her sister, who were living there with my mother, were sort of in an idyllic situation, and this, this event just came out of nowhere. This guy had been traveling around to 11 different states, and he just happened to see her, and it was July, Friday afternoon, close to noon on a very sunny, nice, clear day, beautiful day, and he saw her and picked her out and followed her home and did it, and it really shocked the entire town, that little town of St. Charles, Missouri. Nothing like that had ever happened, and it was a big deal. Woke up that little town.
No, I won't. We'll spare. I'll spare you to go over the details of what exactly happened. But we talked about it, that he had slit her throat.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us. You make a point that basically it's because she made it out of the home and to the neighbor's house that there was some help in capturing this killer. And so
right.
Tell us what that is, unless it's giving too much away for the book. What was it about that gave police some iota of direction in terms of who to look for?
Well, what they said was the way the murder had happened. She had left the apartment and purchased some items for lunch she was making at a store that was just a block away. And she had come back into the house, and that's when he attacked her, and he left her for dead. She got up and ran across the street, knocked on the front door of the neighbor's house, and fell down, and that's where she died, really, on the sidewalk. But so the police were called immediately. There was a receipt for the groceries she purchased, and she could see it really gave them almost, the exact time that she purchased the items, and they could figure out it only took her a few minutes to walk back to the apartment, and
right.
And then by the time they got the phone call, they had a very, very short little window, and they were able to put a bulletin out at the exact place at almost the exact time, and it caught a number of people. Like I said, it's a small town, and it caught a number of people's attention. That one woman in particular knew that that was precisely the time that she was in the parking lot and saw a man run out of a house and jump into a car that had a bad muffler, and it was a convertible. It was an easy to identify vehicle that he was in. And the woman, became a key witness, and it put the police onto him very quickly. I guess had she laid there, if she died in the house, no one would have been home. My mother and her sister were both at work. No one would have been home for a number of hours, and all would have been quiet in the little town. And I think it was this sort of the proximity of the event happening and the police being notified and the call going out and everything happening quickly that they were able to get the little town excited and full of buzz, and a couple people came forward.
Right. Now, so how does the police tighten their scope on this LaRette? And so tell us, proceed as the police do in up to the capture of this serial killer.
Well, he had come into town, and he had never been in town before, and he had run into someone who he had been in jail with for rape earlier, and he was spending a few days with the fellow, and he borrowed his car, and he killed my sister, and drove back home and had lunch with his friend who was off work, and offered to paint the guy's car for him. And the fella thought there was something odd about that, and this guy being an ex-con, I think he has to be careful with if he's hanging around with another ex-con, what kind of trouble they can get into, parole violations or whatever, I don't know. But he thought that was kind of odd, and he heard the stories about the murder and a description of the car, and he realized it was his car, and but LaRette had already phoned, I think, a place to get his car painted, and the fellow there had heard the description, and he didn't get the car painted, but he got his friend to drive him to Kansas to get him out of the state, and the fellow at the car shop called the police and said, "I think there's something funny going on here. A car that fit that description. Guy was trying to get it painted, and the fellow who LaRette was staying with contacted the police, or the police contacted him as a result of talking to the people at the paint shop. I don't remember all of that very clearly. I'm not. That might be the kind of the detail of the hunt of the murderer is the kind of thing that I think a lot of true crime books go into, and I didn't go into it that deeply because that's not what I was writing at the time. I was writing more about the general events and the specifics of who she was and how it affected my family and me. So it's
absolutely
more of a memoir than. In fact, my agent got me a contract to rewrite this as a sort of a more of a standard true crime book, and I couldn't do it because I was too close to it, and I couldn't write it in that format. A true crime book, a true crime reader is used to picking up a certain type of book and a certain kind of narrative, and a lot of it is about the police hunt and the moment by moment. part of that. There's some of that in my book because I cooperated with the major case squad and the FBI and everything, but it's just from, the whole point of view of it is from my perspective, what they were asking me and what they were sending me off to do and things like that.
Yeah, no, certainly I just want to set this up so that the audience understands what kind of monster that we're dealing with here. We really, like I introduced this book, this is a memoir, so we're really going to talk about how this affected you and what that effect turned into. What obviously it's turned into this fine book, but what else transpired? How did it transform your family? Really, that's what's more important. And I got to say that maybe publishers think that there's a traditional or a typical true crime book, but I will tell you that the true crime audience reads about wrongfully convicted and memoirs and all kinds of things, and certainly on this program I've had a variety of true crime books that don't fit the norm at all. I know what the typical book is, but I think publishers think that that's what people want to digest, the same book over and over and over again, but I don't think so. But getting back to this, so the police have him. They've captured him, thanks to in big part to your sister. When do the police contact you, and what is your? I mean, you express this in the book. What is your reaction? What's your family's reaction? How do you get the news?
I was watching. It was about 10 days after the killing, and the family's just devastated. I was living in St. Louis, which is about 30 miles from St. Charles. St. Louis is a bigger city, and
sure.
But even in St. Louis, every night on the 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock news, on the local stations, they're covering this every night. They flash her picture up there. So we're watching the news, and it's 10 o'clock at night, and the news starts, and I get a phone call from one of these two detectives who were put on the case and who tracked him down. And I got the phone call, and they said, we found him, and we know it's him. There's no doubt he's already signed a confession, and so this is the guy. They told me who he was, and he was from Topeka, Kansas. And of course, it's hard to describe. People say it's like a big weight off your shoulder and all that. Well, it is all of that. And I broke down and cried. I thanked the guys, for doing their job, and told my wife. And then I said, oh wow, the news has just started. The local stations. I got the phone book out, and I started calling the local stations and telling them. Because they'd all been covering it, and they got it on, the 10 o'clock news. One or two of them did a just in update kind of thing, and said that they'd captured the killer of her, and so as many of her friends in that who could have found out that night, I'm sure. But
why did you contact them?
Nice. Pardon?
Sorry, I'm not clear why you contacted the police or the media. Pardon me.
Well, I was there. I know the police were probably going to contact them, but I was sitting there after I hung up the phone, and the news and the 10 o'clock news had just begun, and I thought, now, am I going to sit here on the phone and call each of my family members? Everybody I call, I'm going to have to either say, look, they just caught the killer, here he is, blah blah blah, and hang up. Or I'll get into a conversation that will take a long time, and then I'll have to call another. I have 6 other siblings, and I thought, if I can call the TV stations and let them know, and of course I'm sure they probably heard it from me, and then they had to call somebody and follow up if they hadn't gotten the call. But I thought that was just the fastest way to get the news out to everybody, because she was very popular in high school. And it had been in the news, and so many people, knew about this girl who had been murdered in St. Charles. And I thought this will be the fastest way to get it out. It took me to call the stations. It took me about 5 or 6 minutes to call the local stations, and then I started calling, my immediate family, and I just thought it was a good way to get it out.
When you initially were given the news of your sister being murdered,
mm-hmm.
How did you get that news?
I was at work. It was about 11:30 on a Friday afternoon, and I was at work, and I was a microbiologist, and one of the things I had to do was go out into the. I worked at a toiletry and fragrance and toiletry perfume factory, and we make hand lotions and things like that, and shampoos. And I was in quality control. One of my jobs was to go out into the plant and to get samples and to mark them and bring them into the laboratory so we could test them, And I heard my name on the page, and I grabbed the phone out in the plant, and I heard a voice on the end of the phone. I couldn't tell who it was at first, and when I realized it was my mother. It sounded like she was on a bad connection, and this is 1980 before cell phones, so a lot of times you get a connection. If you make a call to Europe back then, you get fuzzy connection and bad sound. And I kept saying, "Speak up, Mom, speak up." But what she was doing was just trying to tell me that her daughter, my sister, had been murdered, and she was mustering as much, I guess, energy as she could do to muster to tell me. It was really difficult. And then I finally realized it was her and what she was telling me. It took me a long time for it to sink in. I kept thinking she was telling me that Mickey was in a car wreck and she was at the hospital, or. And I kept saying, "Mom, she's not dead. What is this?" My mom had a way of blowing things out of proportion sometimes, And I thought, no, this can't be what she's really talking about, And then she told me she had been murdered, and I just couldn't believe it. So I was going in and out of trying to accept that, as it's a hard thing to accept. There's something about your psychology that doesn't let it come through to you. I guess we have mechanisms built in. It's probably the same way that a parent, when they hear that their child's been killed or something, must be the same thing. It's a disbelief. It takes a while, to get through.
Yeah, absolutely. Big shock. And how long roughly was it between that period and when you called the media to announce that, hey, they've got someone?
Oh, about 10 days.
About 10 days.
Yeah.
And was the funeral in between that period of time?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what was the funeral like in terms of the media and the public? I know it's, I've been at family funerals, but what was the media attention and the public's response to this?
Well, there were always police around everywhere, and I asked at one point I asked one of the, I don't know if he, at one point I couldn't tell if I was talking to an FBI person or a local detective unless I knew him by sight. Even at the burial, when we took her out to the cemetery, there were that was, I've been to a lot of funerals too, but this was tainted by the fact that there were police around in areas. It's almost like when the president comes somewhere and there's Secret Service people around. Mm-hmm. There are cops around. And I asked, and the one fellow said, "Well, sometimes these guys are hiding and they're watching, and it's part of what they do. It's part of their ritual." And so I had a sense that the guy could be looking at me right now. And another really odd aspect of it was that no one, none of her friends from high school. She was popular, and she had dated a number of guys that were 18, 19 years old, who were coming up to me and sobbing and trying to say how much they loved her and everything. But emotionally, I had to detach from that because in the back of my mind, I'm thinking this could have been the guy that did it, because we had no idea who did this. It never occurred to any of us that someone from out of town could have just come and randomly picked her out and done this to her and then left town. It never flashed into my mind that something like that. It was always, could this be the ex-boyfriend who wrote her name on the tower and was in love with her and she rejected, or could this be this guy that she dated the night before? It was the first time he took her out, and maybe he tried to make a pass at her and she didn't want to go all the way, and he freaked out. I mean, all kinds of. So I couldn't be really. It's a very odd experience to have people comforting you, throwing their arms around you and trying to comfort you, and you feel like you can't accept it. That's one of the. And to watch these kids in high school, coming up in into the funeral parlor where she was laid out, and most, like I said, I think I said in the book, most of these divorces that's ever happened to them is maybe parents divorced, or maybe they knew someone who got killed in a car wreck. But this murder, the way it was described in the newspapers and all, they all knew how she died, and it was a horror. She was stabbed multiple times in the heart and throat slit, which was this guy's M.O. His signature was, I think, of all the women he murdered, he slit their throat from ear to ear. That was the thing he did, and he punctured the heart. He wanted to make sure, they were dead.
Right.
Yeah.
So it did give you describe in the book, it didn't give you very much comfort to have this guy arrested, but you'll take a little bit of solace, I guess, at that time.
Yeah, it was great to know that they caught the guy. Then I could go to all these kids or look at these kids who would talk to me, or people, adults even, who were suspects, and I knew that it wasn't them, especially because this guy had confessed. It was a great relief from that perspective, and to know that he was off the street. That if he could do that to her, he could do that to someone else. We didn't know that he had done that to almost 30 other women. But it doesn't take away the fact that the loved one's gone, and nothing's going to bring that back. But it was nice to be able to, especially the one fellow who had dated her for the first time, took her out. It was the first date, and he took her out that night and took her home. Yeah. And then that happened, and of course the police grabbed him. And of all things, this guy collects. He's a nice guy. I know him even now. He's a heck of a guy. He'd do anything for you. But he likes to collect weapons. And I mean, I just thought it was so crazy that the police, go to talk to this guy, and then they take him to his apartment, and he has knives and all kinds of like medieval weapons, the balls with the spikes hanging on his wall in his living room. All kinds of knives, and I would find it hard not to think, well, we got this solved right here. Here we are. But it was the farthest thing from me. It was nice to be able to go up to John and say, John, I'm glad it's not you. You're a nice guy.
Yeah, because it was impressed upon me quite a bit that he did approach you at the funeral, and you, like you had already explained, that you just couldn't couldn't embrace this guy, so you had this opportunity later. The poor guy. Yeah, the questioning with all those weapons on the walls, that must have been interesting for sure. Now, what is your contact with the police in terms of, I know police will often keep you abreast of what's going on, but to what extent did they do that regarding LaRette and his other crimes, or what was happening and proceeding with the trial, as it were?
Well, we got a call now and then. Some members of my family did, but I mean, he was arrested. There was a pre-trial. There was a trial a year later, and he was convicted of capital murder and given the death sentence. And during that 1 year period, aside from notifying us that there's a pre-trial, do we want to attend that, and and then when the trial is in that, there wasn't much communication between at least me and the police, and I don't think many of my other family members talked with him. And then once he was convicted and put in jail, we just forgot about him. Really,
right.
Tried to put it out of our mind. A couple of my brothers would contact the St. Charles Police, the two detectives that originally worked on it, just to see what was going on. And I would get word from a family member, he made an appeal, and that's not whatever going to happen, and yada yada. And I knew if they were ever going to actually execute him, that would be a big deal in the news, because they were not executing people in Missouri. I mean, and I think something came up in the news about some of his other murders had been solved, and a few of them were in the St. Louis area, and that brought it to my attention, and I started watching more closely. And when I can't remember if I made a call or if I heard on the news that they were going to set an execution date. That's when I knew I had to contact them and the authorities and tell them that if someone from the family could be a witness, I wanted to be a witness at the execution.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. And they sent me some forms. They wanted to know why, and all that. And I filled out the paperwork, and I was allowed to do that.
Why did you want to be a witness? Did you have any qualms whatsoever? Or how strong a decision was this for you? How sure were you of it?
Well, one of the things, like I told you, I had this special connection with her, and right. It sounds kind of morbid, but when he was killing her, I know she was probably at some point. I think a person is going to be crying out, and they're going to be saying help, and they may even start to yell irrationally for people who may not even be around. How a baby might yell for mommy when mommy's nowhere in sight. But I thought, Mickey had me and 4 other brothers, and I wondered if during the struggle if she ever called out for me, if she ever yelled out for me to help her. And I even wrote to the guy, Anthony LaRette, and he was in the penitentiary. I wrote him a couple letters, and I asked him that. I said, that's all I'd like to know is if you remember her calling out my name, Dennis. Do you remember that? And it sounds kind of morbid even when I talk about it, but I just wondered if in the last moments of her life, if I was on her mind, and at some point I realized that that's not something that you could know or would want to know. Really, it's kind of crazy to think about that, but he was the last person to be really with her alive and hear her talking, and so I felt like when he died, I needed to be there when he died. I wasn't there when she died, but I had to be there when he died. I really didn't have a desire to, I didn't want to go and I want to watch this son of a bitch die. I want to go there, and I initially when it happened, I would have killed him with my bare hands. In fact, I wanted to do that. But 15 years later when they executed him, I just wanted to be there because he was the last one to be with her. When she died, I was going to be there when he died. In a way, I was representing her. That's about as best as I can explain it.
Yes. Now, in terms of the rest of your family, like say your mother, what was the effect of Mickey's death on your mother? I knew my mother was not in the best of health, and she'd had some heart problems, and she smoked and never exercised or anything, and I knew the shock of it was just, I could tell that it had changed her. And I remember saying to one of my siblings, I said, "This is going to kill Mom. She's not going to last 5 years. She's going to die. This is going to kill her. It's too much." It was her youngest daughter and all that. And Mom died about 4 years later. And I could tell it changed her. I think it's a terrible thing for a parent to lose a child, any parent. The thing about something like a purposeful, murder like this for no reason at all. I mean, this guy didn't even know her, and it wasn't like he didn't know her and he was driving a car and he swerved and killed her. He didn't know her, but he saw her and he picked her out, and then he purposefully killed her. And he was the kind of guy that killed and raped. I mean, sometimes some of his victims were raped after the police. I don't know how they determined this, but some of the victims were raped after they were killed, which is. And I don't know. That worked on my head a lot, and I think it just kind of. I could just tell she just didn't laugh the same way anymore. It really took a lot out of her. So, I can't say it killed her, but it sure didn't make the rest of her life. Sure. What I was going to ask, too, is the very interesting, the letters that you wrote to Anthony LaRette here. You say you wanted to find out what, if she did call out your name. And I just got to say, I would imagine that the people that she loved the most, you would certainly have enough time for those people's faces to flash into your mind, whether she called out your name specifically, but I think that it's interesting that you wrote him and then he responded. What's interesting is what you wrote in the book, what you really thought he really felt about this, but so tell us a little bit about the contents, and then please tell us what you wrote in the book, because I think it's interesting, the difference between the two.
Oh, you mean when I was... In
terms of a conversation on how he felt, really, about... somebody says, are you remorseful? And there are killers that would say in court, yeah, I'm sorry. But, really, behind bars or behind closed, so...
Well, he was... I guess what I wrote in the book was that he had said something in court, and every time this guy was always he always made it seem like it was not his fault, and I found this out when I looked at the rest of the murders. It was always whenever he would talk about a murder, and I'm really glad that he confessed to all these other murders, because then people could find out what happened to, what actually did happen to their loved one. I only went through 10 days of not knowing, and there were people that went through 10 years, of not knowing. But he would always say that he had gone to the house and he just wanted to rob the woman or steal something from the house, and then they would panic, and then they would cause an altercation, and he would have to kill them. It was always he would, he made himself the victim in a way, and I wrote something in the book about what went through my mind. I think I don't remember if I was sitting at the trial or if I was thinking about this as I was writing the book. But I think that you have to be filled with so much hate to do something like what he did. I can't quote it from the book. If I had the page, I'd read it, but it's pretty nasty.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
I was thinking what he would really like to say is, I went in to kill the bitch, and you know what I mean. It'd be more. I don't know if I could actually say the words that I wrote in the book on your radio show, because it's pretty nasty, But he wanted to. She started to scream, so I smacked her some more, and she wouldn't shut up, so I slit her throat, and that, and I had to hurry up to get her pants off before she died, because I wanted to screw her while she was still moving, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I just felt that there has to be that kind of ugly hate for women in this man somehow. How that comes about, I don't know, but.
No, you're bang on, because I won't go into it too much, but I interviewed a serial killer for the book that I had, and the person was more than candid with me about how he felt, and it is along those lines. So your imagination is not, because you have to think. I mean, that's what I say. You see these lust killers in court, and then they ask him a question whether he was, he says he's sorry. I mean, you're not sorry. That's not a show of remorse, because nobody's even capable of what these people do. A normal, the vast majority of human species is not capable of such a thing. So you're right. This kind of anger they have to hate. One way or another, it doesn't matter why, it doesn't how they got there, but they have to hate, and they have an incredible amount of energy to kill.
Yeah.
30 women raped and killed. This is a very, very hateful man. So you're not far off at all, no.
No.
Not at all. Now, you've included quite a bit of the background of Anthony LaRette as well, and
right.
I've done a lot of programs, and the bevy or the gamut of cases are that serial killers sometimes have head injuries, and then the author that it covers the case thinks, geez, they didn't deserve the death penalty because of these mitigating circumstances, the head injury. Now, with this Anthony LaRette, he was diagnosed early on by a neurosurgeon with frontal lobal epilepsy, and sort of a very pretty, I don't know, nasty, but a bad childhood as a result of some of this stuff. So without going too far into it, tell us of what he was diagnosed with, and what was Anthony LaRette like in terms of his assessment from psychiatrists and psychologists from an early age?
Well, I think this is something that I gained in rewriting the book. I didn't realize that that he had those issues. He had some problems hitting the head when he was a kid. I think he started off pretty much with a low IQ to begin with. He was having trouble in school, and he got hit in the head. He had some electrical shocks at one point. He started having epileptic type seizures, and like you'd mentioned, he was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy, and he was in and out of the doctor's office and then institutions. He was institutionalized, I think, when he was about 13 until he was close to 15, sent out of state, and brought back, and then he'd get into some type of trouble. He'd have some kinds of problems, and he'd be seeing a doctor again, and back and forth, and I saw this when I look at it over the span of his lifetime. What I see is a fellow who who's being seen by the medical profession, and recognized that there's something wrong here, and they keep treating him, and I don't know if it's because they put him back with his parents who weren't watching him very closely or what, but he'd get into altercations with people. He'd break somebody's arm. He'd masturbate in public, doing all these crazy things. And eventually he started doing things that would get him put into jail for a while. And the first really bad one being he was convicted of rape, and still, even while he was in jail, he was being seen by doctors, and they were talking about how he has these seizures, and he acts out in violent ways toward women and everything, and to me it seems like I could get really angry and say, if our mental health profession was a little bit more on the ball, this guy wouldn't have been out on the streets so much. It seems like it got to a point where if he wasn't in a mental institution, he was in jail, and he was just he would get jail sentences that were, I think he got one jail sentence for 10 years, and he was out on the streets in less than a year, and things like that. And it just makes me think that it makes me wonder how well our mental health care institutions for criminals, how effective they are. And also, I'm a firm believer that if you commit a crime that's serious enough to get you 10 years, if the judge is going to give you a 10-year sentence, I don't see this getting out in a year stuff. I really think sentences should mean something, and
well, the thing is, we were talking about his first serious crime. He's 22. He rapes and murders a person, a senseless rape and murder. This is where he is diagnosed with his temporal lobe epilepsy, and he's smelling rotten cabbage, and he's wet. He's grand mal seizures, like you had mentioned. But they have all this passive-aggressive personality disorder with social and sexual deviant features.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they knew. They had a fair amount of information from the past, from the military, from this.
Right.
And yet, so I can't say you're going to. Not that I wouldn't love to blame psychiatrists for all of society's illness, but no, it's. You can see 5 to 20. He could have done 20. He didn't do 20. So He was back out on the street, and he isn't the first guy that goes on and does a stint in prison, and it goes on to continue in his murderous ways. So, I would say that this is a person that's been, like you mentioned, he was breaking people's arms when he was a kid, and he was exposing himself. So he had all of these things that he was finally properly diagnosed with at 22. So he had organic brain injury, and he had psychiatric and psychological problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so, then that's at a young age. So it's a sort of a recipe. I don't know what you can say, but it's a interesting story. But there are people that would say that this person is maybe not totally responsible for what he did. But you did quite a bit of research on this person's attitude. What was he like at trial, and overall, in response to all these rapes and murders, what was his overall attitude?
Well, like I said, he saw himself as the victim, and his attitude, I think, toward at least at the trial, until he was convicted, until he got the death penalty, he was kind of smug, but when the jury came back with the death penalty, that's the first time he put his head down, and I think he wept. But until then, he was, sort of indignant, I guess. At the pretrial, a year after he murdered my sister, I confronted him, and I said, you murdered my baby sister. And I don't know what I expected him to say, but I expected him to say something. And he just kind of smirked as if I just asked him, I just mentioned that it was, we were having a nice day. Or I don't remember if he said, so what, or he just smirked like it was no big deal. And I thought to myself, how can you respond to somebody whose sister you just murdered that way? Well, I didn't realize that, he had murdered plenty of women. And, one of the detectives I talked to said that he created fantasies about it. And a lot of times, I guess if you talk to, if I was talking to him about a murdered sister, she said something about if he could stay in his fantasy that he's the victim, that he can live with it. But like when I wrote to him and wanted to talk to him, wanted to ask him if she called out my name, someone from the penitentiary wrote, who had been interviewing him, said he won't acknowledge your letter because then he would have to consider your sister a human being, and that would break his fantasy, and so he's not going to bother with that.
So what response did you get from him overall?
You mean directly to me?
Yes. He just didn't respond at all to the letters?
No, he didn't respond to the letters. He was given the letters, and I guess he handed them back to the people at the penitentiary, and they contacted me both times. After I had mailed the letters, they contacted me and said he won't talk to you about it.
Do you think he read them?
I don't know. No, I don't
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, you talk about Detective Patricia Jewell. Mm-hmm. How is it that she comes to question him? What's the turn of events? And that's where they got the inevitable confession of all these rapes and murders. But why is it he speaks to her? How does she come to speak to LaRette about other murders?
Well, LaRette started out in Florida, and Pinellas County, I think it is, and when he was younger, and then his family moved to Topeka, Kansas. Well, I think he went back down there a few times, and there were some. There was some connection with they were investigating some type of a murder in Florida, and LaRette was being held in Missouri, and one of the cops at the penitentiary had heard about the murder in Florida, and the people. The murder in Florida somehow was connected to either the people from Missouri or people that committed that murder in Florida committed a murder in Missouri. I can't remember now, but Missouri officials were contacted, and they went to Florida as part of the investigation, and they met this Deputy Jewell, Patricia Jewell, and she helped them out while they were down there, and somehow information that she helped them gather helped solve a crime in Missouri. And so once that happened, they had suspicions that LaRette may have committed some crimes in Florida, that he might have traveled back. Like I said, he traveled to 11 different states, and I think a couple of times he went back to his home state, and he committed a few murders in Florida. And the jailer, or I don't know the term, but the cop, the warden, or somebody who was in contact with LaRette while he was sitting in jail in Missouri, said, look, there's this woman down in Florida that helped us solve this case, and she was mentioning this case down in Florida that had to do with this young girl or something, but you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? And he said something like, yeah, I might have some information on that. And the warden said, well, you think you might want to help this young girl out? And he considered talking to her. And he talked to her and gave her some information that helped her solve the case, and then said that he'd like to talk to her about some other cases. They had been trying to get LaRette to talk about. They were suspicious that he had committed, many crimes, but they could never get him to get anything out of him in any kind of interviews. He just clammed up. But he decided that this woman from Florida, after he had met her, he'd talk to her and only her. So she began making trips from Florida to Missouri to interview him. And he started, revealing all this stuff to her. And she tracked it down and solved a lot of these cases.
Incredible.
She spent 6 years doing it. She'd never done anything like that before. And when it was over and he was executed, she went out, got a desk job. She said, I didn't want to go through that again. It's sort of like she got hooked into it in a way and felt obligated and felt like, well, if I'm the person that he's going to open up to, well, then I'm going to have to do this if we're going to find out, about this. So she became the messenger, I guess. And
so the police had an inkling that he had been active maybe in their state or in other murders beyond your sister, but this woman put it all together with this sort of what other word for it other than relationship that she developed and cultivated with this killer, and then he confessed to 30 rapes and savage murders.
Yeah.
Incredible.
She said he considered her a friend. But she said he certainly wasn't my friend. But she had to sort of put on. She had to. The thing that did it, I think it's kind of interesting. I thought about this. He was a serial killer, and once he committed to the crime and was convicted and put in jail, I mean, he was contacted by authors, he was contacted by people from universities who wanted to study him and this and that. And everybody who met him knew he was a serial killer. Anybody who got a chance to talk to him knew that I'm going to talk to a serial killer. And you would have a particular attitude about yourself talking to. I would be on guard. But he said the reason he opened up to her was when she was first introduced to him. She just treated him like a person. He didn't sense that she was judging him or something. There was something about the fact that she was just, I don't know if she was emotionless or what, but he didn't get any sense that, she's looking at me and she knows who I am. I'm a monster and I'm sure she hates me, and all that. There was something there, and that's what allowed him to open up to her. So she had to kind of play on that, I guess. She had to. Somebody in the department said that he thought LaRette thought she was his girlfriend or something, and I mentioned that to Patricia, and she said, "Oh no way!" He thought it was, he thought I was his girlfriend. No way. But it was kind of interesting that when he went to his execution, he drew a picture of her and hung it on the wall in his waiting cell, his holding cell. I think he did. I think he did think he had at least, if not a girlfriend, at least a friend. He felt something toward her, but she doesn't like to think that.
Well, the thing is, she's trained, and she was trained to treat this person like a decent human being, regardless of the, revulsion at who he was and what he had done. Now, a normal person wouldn't be able to contain themselves. A professional does. Yeah. Then when he thinks, oh, geez, I can, and obviously these people are trained to deal with these narcissistic personalities. Ask them about themselves like you really give a damn, but really you have a disdain for them. So, but I still think it's a masterful job, because hardly anybody can do that and elicit that kind of confession out of anyone. So she did a masterful job, but I can understand why she might want to have a desk job after. That's the kind of experience you would do once and never want to do again, that's for sure.
Well, you hear all that horror, and then, I don't know how if she was involved in contacting the families or not, but I mean, just to go through one of them, to go through one case is bad enough, and the effect that it has on people. But to go through, get that one done, and then now we're going to start on another one. It just I don't know how she did it. I think the woman is a real hero.
Absolutely, and that's what I said to homicide cops. I said, I say now, it's the toughest job that no one wants. You can imagine murder scenes, crime scenes. I don't know how you get that out of your head. I don't know how you go on and have a normal day or a normal week. And so these people, some of these dedicated guys have done it for years and years and years. It's incredible, really. Someone has to do this job, and then there are only a few that can. And now there are select tales like this where a person goes in and rolls up their sleeves and gets the confession out of people, and really we only get a taste of that in fictional television and movies, So it's incredible, this story that you've written, Dennis. It's been how long since Mickey's death? And I know that you had some people in your corner that helped you get through this. Obviously, you had the birth of a daughter, Megan, and your wife, if I'm not correct, Charlene. Tell us about how you really, I don't know how you got through it, but how you managed to pick yourself up enough to be where you are today and have this book come out, and the overall effect. Who is behind you, and where are you today, and tell us a little bit about that.
Well, for decades, I just spent. It became a part of my life. Every day, every single day, I thought of my sister. Every day, and time goes by, and I ended up in therapy over it. I thought it was over something else, but it was over that. It was over that, and that's where I got into the creative side of myself, and I got into making films and things like that, and eventually I just felt like I had to do something through artistically, at least maybe to deal with it, and until I wrote the book, people, when I told people I was writing a book, people would say, well, even if nothing happens with the book, it'll be good for you to do that. And I'd say, yeah, it'd be good for me. And I thought, it's not so great for me. It's sort of I wrote the book in a way to have something so that if somebody managed to read it and they read about what a good kid she was, that somehow my sister lives on, and I wanted to do a good job of it. But truthfully, when I got to the end of the book, I felt like a lot of things that happened in the decades since her death that made me think that we don't just die, that there's an afterlife, because I got signs of that I knew were, from her. However, it was happening. And I figured that when I got finished with the book, I thought, well, I've never really talked to her. If I believe that she in some way is still existing, if people go on after they die somehow, then maybe she can hear me. And so I wrote a letter to her, and that's the last part of the book. And when I wrote that letter, that's really what sort of ended the crisis part of that event for me. I wrote that letter, and if there's any kind of a closure of any sort, that's what did it. And then I felt compelled. I thought, well, if she can hear me, then maybe he can too. So I wrote a letter to him also. And in the letter, I basically told him I really couldn't forgive him for what he did, but I can think of him as a child, as a young child. And if I think of him as a young child, I can love that young child, and I can give him that. I can forgive the child, but I can't forgive the adult. It's going to take somebody bigger than me to do that.
And when did this version, you mentioned that The Girl That Had No Enemies, which was basically just a memoir, and then this is the new version with the addition of LaRette's crimes and the entire story. When did this come out, and when did the original come out?
The original came out in 2008, and I had tried to get different. I got an agent that thought they could handle it and get a book deal for me, and they couldn't. And I said, well, I'm just going to publish it myself, and I did. Right. And then that got me another agent, and he said, you know what? There's more to this story. He sort of put me onto the idea that what about the killer himself and the other people and this woman? You never. So he sort of gave me the idea to write the second book. But it's kind of funny. The first book, called She Had No Enemies, you can still buy that. The Kindle version is still for sale, and I have that for sale for 99 cents. I just thought at the time I would sell the Kindle version really cheap, and that would be advertising for the book. Well, right. As it is now, the Kindle version is still available, but the book is out of print. But the Kindle version is selling like crazy, and the new one is selling, but not like the older one. The first version is selling is really selling well.
Yeah, like I say, it's hard to. I don't think publishers know what's going on anymore. I mean, it's just you've touched people with the book, and I think that's why it's selling. So, but this is a fine book as well. I mean, you separate the two voices, so it is again, we follow along. It's like a trajectory of both lives, basically at the same time. Very, very interesting. I want to thank you, Dennis. Is there any special or any place you'd like people to go to purchase this book? I know it's on Amazon, probably Barnes & Noble through order, but is there any place specific that you'd like people to go to order this book, say a website or something like that?
No, that's the place to get it. Get it through Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And you can get if through Amazon, you can get the Kindle version of the book. I have that for sale for a couple bucks. I'm not trying to make a bunch of money on the book. I'm just, in fact, when I published it on Amazon, I wanted to know what was the lowest price they would allow me to sell the book, and I think that it's $8.40 is the least they'll allow me to sell the book.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and the Kindle version is like a couple of dollars, but you can get the Kindle versions of the earlier ones too. No, I don't. I'm working on other things, and as long as if people are buying it, and I get strangest thing happened to me. I know you want to get me off the air right now, probably, but
no, go ahead.
Anthony LaRette's niece contacted me, and
wow.
she said she's named after him. She said, I was named after my uncle, and I never thought anything about that until I found out who he was. And then I found out about your book, and she got in touch with me, and I guess, I don't know what her circumstances are, but she couldn't afford to buy the book. So I sent her a book, and she read it, and she's contacted me a couple times and written to me. Very, very, very strange, but a number of people from victims, family members, have contacted me, and they were grateful I wrote the book because for some reason the part where I witnessed his execution helps them go through it.
Interesting, yeah.
It sent something, yeah. So anyway.
No, I think you've done a very big tribute to your sister, to your beloved sister, and it's a very, very interesting book. It's heart-wrenching, of course. As I think the true crime reader has gone through enough tragedy in their lives that they can relate. And on all the true crime books I read, it's a huge component of the story. It's great when we get the perspective right from someone like yourself, right in the family. So it's a fine book, and I want to thank you very much for coming on this evening and sharing that with us on True Murder.
It's my pleasure. Nice talking to you.
Well, thank you very much, Dennis, and you have a good evening. Good night.
You too.
Good night.
Good night.